OK, let me tell you about one of the biggest stories in the world over the past year or so, a story that has massive implications for Europe and the world, and which has been ignored by so much of the media because it doesn't fit their narrative, of course. In France, nuclear energy is back in fashion. The government announcing it'll build 6 massive new nuclear power plants over the next 3 decades.
What we have to build today, because it is the right time, because it is what our country needs, because the conditions are there, is the rebirth of France's nuclear industry.
Emissions-free and affordable nuclear power not only supplies most of France's needs, but supplements the unstable power systems in Germany, Italy, the UK and others who have all gotten into trouble trying to shift from fossil fuels to renewables. This move by France, which until now had been talking about scaling back nuclear, is landmark recognition that you can't get to net zero without going nuclear.
If we want to respect our climate commitments and cut our greenhouse emissions by 55% by 2030, as well as achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, we have to commit to structural and historic projects to prepare for the future. The projects cultivate strong ambition, making France the first country in 30 years to stop depending on fossil fuels.
Yep, climate policy, net zero emissions, energy that's reliable, affordable and emissions-free. There is only one proven option. It is nuclear. And as I've always argued, forget political resistance and the silly scare campaigns. In the end, the facts, the logic has to win out. Let's talk to Federal Resources Minister Keith Pitt, joining us live from Canberra. Good to talk to you again, Keith. If France can't get to net zero and the rest of Europe without a solid dose of nuclear energy, can Australia?
Chris, it's great to be with you. And I mean, what's happening in Europe at the moment and the things that we are really focused on is, of course, that instability around Russia and the Ukraine. And we want to see a de-escalation of tensions in that region. It is good to see that the French are starting to invest in more nuclear technology and nuclear generation for electricity. And for Australia's part, and we've spoken about this many times before, Chris, it is on our technology roadmap. We've got a watching brief on small modular reactors. We've signed an agreement around technology sharing with the United Kingdom, and we'll continue to keep a close eye on it. But in this country, you would need agreement between both of the major parties, including Labor, and they've ruled it out.
But this is a significant step forward, right? This is a big development because after Fukushima, there's been a lot of talk about nuclear going backwards. Certainly Germany was getting out of nuclear energy and France was talking about allowing its existing plants to run down. This is a ramping up. It's a recognition, isn't it, that so much of Europe has been reliant on gas, often gas from Russia. They've had enormous problems and expensive electricity in Germany, running out of energy even in the UK. France's nuclear energy supplies are going to underpin not just itself, but the whole of Europe for decades to come.
Oh, well, you're spot on about what's being used at the moment. I mean, the most recent numbers I've seen, close on 70% of energy in Europe comes from coal, oil and gas, and still does. So if they're looking to shift, and a lot of that gas is reliant on Russia, this is why right now, I mean, the world gas price, the European gas price in particular, is between $30 and $40 a gigajoule. In Australia, it's single digits. We want to make sure it stays there. I mean, Australia's resources are for the benefit of the Australian people first and foremost. But our industry produces around 111 million tonnes of gas every year, roughly. We think we could probably have around 5 million tonne a quarter that's uncontracted. Of course, that will go into locations where there is demand, and those high prices will be paid to Australian producers, and that's for the benefit of our country.
Now, we've had some horrible crunch periods over the past decade when it comes to supplies of electricity in this country. And we've just heard last week that AGL is looking at shutting down some coal plants ahead of schedule in Victoria and New South Wales. Are you worried? It's hard to look to 10 years down the track, but on current estimates, we look like exacerbating drastically our electricity supply issues in a decade, don't we?
Ultimately, these are state responsibilities under the Constitution. But clearly the Commonwealth is concerned about making sure we sweat those assets, particularly those coal-fired power stations which have been so reliable for so long, 5 or 6 decades in some cases, And we want to make sure we do have that affordable, reliable electricity for the benefit of our nation. This is why we're looking at Kurri Kurri. We're building a gas plant there predominantly as a peaker. We want to make sure we keep those big generators in the system because it's in the best interest of all of us. I mean, you've only got to look at what the Greens want to do, Chris. I mean, they want to shut coal, oil and gas, all new projects. And then they've come out yesterday and say not only the new ones, but the ones that just got approved, they'll get rid of those too.
Well, this is the point, right? Labor's sort of changed its tune here. They were opposed to Kurri Kurri. Now they're saying, yeah, that gas plant, they could support it. They're going to somehow magically transfer it to hydrogen as soon as they can. But the Greens, who would have enormous power, of course, under a Labor government, they would control the Senate. If Labor forms government, they could help them get the numbers to form government in the lower house. They're saying that, yeah, even existing approvals would disappear. What will that do for energy supplies and investment in this country?
Well, just on last week's policy from the Greens, it's $500 billion in investment and 80,000 plus jobs that would be lost. I mean, we're assessing the most recent iteration that they'll also knock over all the ones which have been approved. It's just not in our national interest. It's bad for our reputation. And never forget what happened with Julia Gillard. There will never be a carbon tax under Julia Gillard's governments. And Mr Albanese will bend the knee just the same if it means getting the keys for the lodge. That is dangerous for our country. It's dangerous for those jobs in the resources sector in particular. And for regional Australia. Can you imagine Mr Albanese as a Prime Minister for regional Australia? I certainly can't.
How can it be that these green left politicians, these climate alarmists who demonise coal and say we need to shut down that industry, one of our largest export industries, how can it be that one of their leading figures, Zali Steggall, takes $100,000 from a family that have made their fortune largely from selling coal interests to China?
Oh, look, I couldn't tell you how many times I've heard the member for Warringah bang on about integrity. This is hypocrisy writ large. I'm pleased the AEC is out there doing its job. And, you know, it's pretty clear and it's pretty obvious. You can read any paper in the country about what's happened. So there is oversight. Things are being found. People are being caught out. It's not our side of politics, Chris. It's those making the most noise.
She suggests that the reason donors might want to try and keep their donations secret is because people in the coalition party like yourself would intimidate them and there'd be recriminations if anybody knew about the donations. Is there any cases of this that you're aware of?
Mate, that's just ridiculous and fanciful. We're trying to make sure the resources sector continues to grow, not shut it down. There's no benefit to Australia from closing coal mines, closing gas operations, closing other parts of the resources sector. I mean, this is a sector that's contributed $34 billion in taxes and royalties in the last 12 months. That is how we pay for the essential services Australians rely on.
You haven't taken any secret donations from renewable energy interests, have you? Or from the Tofu Collective?
Mate, everything is declared up front. We meet all the rules. You know how it works. And they're done by the party, not me as an individual.
Thanks for joining us, Keith. I appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
Resources Minister Keith Pitt there live from Canberra.